In the world of haute couture, where tradition is revered and innovation is feared, two brilliant minds are about to collide. Leah Ferrara, the bold, creative soul willing to risk everything for change. Matteo Rinaldi, the strategist who believes that control is the only way to survive. Between sharp glances, forbidden decisions, and secrets that could destroy an empire, a story unfolds. A story about ambition, about trust, and about an ending neither of them could have predicted. Welcome to Maison Ferrara. Before the story begins, imagine you spotted an irresistible piece in the Maison Ferrara window and stepped inside. What city in the world would you be coming from? Tell us in the comments. We want to see how far Maison Ferrara's clients would reach. And now, let us take you there.
Milan. The sky wore a stylish shade of gray, as if even the clouds had been designed. In the pulsing heart of the fashion capital, between classical buildings and daring storefronts, stood the majestic headquarters of Maison Ferrara, an Italian fashion house as traditional as the mosaics of the Galleria Vittorio Emanuele II. But behind those white marble walls and crystal chandeliers, something essential was quietly slipping away, the soul of the brand. Leah Ferrara, granddaughter of the founder, held the position of creative director with passion, and the weight of a legacy on her shoulders. An artist with a vibrant spirit. She believed fashion was more than design. It was voice. It was identity. It was boldness. But her ideas often clashed with the cold pragmatism of the current CEO, Matteo Rinaldi. Matteo wasn't just a manager. He was a strategist of numbers, the man who had saved the company from collapse years before, and the same man who trimmed the wings of creativity. Impeccable, elegant, rational. For him, emotion had no place in spreadsheets. Between them, a silent battlefield. Meetings full of subtle jabs, sharp glances, and a tense respect that barely concealed the creative friction. But behind the professional masks, something else lingered. A subtle chemistry. A magnetism neither dared to name. Everything changed on a rainy Thursday afternoon. The assistant walked in holding a tablet, her face pale with nerves. Sophie Delmar has sent a proposal. She wants to collaborate with Maison Ferrara. The name made the air shift. Sophie Delmar. Young, digital, revolutionary. She designed clothes in augmented reality. She was a TikTok sensation. Millions of followers. And zero respect for tradition. Matteo frowned. Leah, on the other hand, felt her heart race. This is our chance to reconnect with the younger audience, she said. Matteo replied bluntly, "We're not turning Maison Ferrara into a lab for fleeting trends." Leah stared at him, and in that moment, she knew. He would never approve. But she also knew, with every ounce of intuition that guided her craft, Sophie was the future, and the future doesn't wait for permission. Milan was still asleep when Leah left the house in an oversized coat and eyes full of determination. In her hand, a leather folder with confidential documents. In her heart, the certainty that she was about to cross a line with no return. She entered a discreet cafe in the Navigli district, where local artists often hide from the tourists, waiting for her, sitting with the laptop covered in stickers and a forgotten cappuccino in her cup, was Sophie Delmar. Sophie was everything Maison Ferrara was not. Irreverent, digital, and absolutely adored by an entire generation that dressed more for their phone camera than for the mirrors of haute couture. "Are you sure?" asked Sophie, eyes wide. "You know this could destroy my career," Leah replied before opening the folder. Inside, a copy of an old contract. A legal loophole that still gave her limited autonomy as creative director. Her signature alone was enough to approve artistic collaborations. Technical. Experimental. Like this one. If it fails, I fall. But if it works, Maison Ferrara lives another 50 years. Then let's make history, replied Sophie, reaching out her hand. They signed it right there. To the soft sound of nostalgic jazz coming from the cafe radio. 2 days later, the first content began to appear. Videos of models wearing digital outfits in surreal environments, filtered by artificial intelligence. Looks that blended classic luxury with urban aesthetics. A dress with liquid shimmer. A coat that changed color to the rhythm of music. Everything completely outside the brand's traditional script. At first, Matteo just watched. He was confused. What was happening? Maison's social media engagement skyrocketed. The TikTok account exploded. Young people were using hashtags like #NewFerrara and #FerraraReloaded. International influencers started reposting. The brand's name was back in the feeds, but not in the way Matteo would have approved. He called Leah in for an emergency meeting. Did you mess with the digital pieces of the campaign? He asked, already suspecting. Leah simply stared at him, then answered with a calm as sharp as a sewing needle. You wanted numbers. I'm delivering relevance. Matteo said nothing. He was furious. But inside him, an alarm was ringing. Something was slipping out of control, and it had her face. The buzz in the city now had a name, Maison Ferrara, but not for its glorious past, rather, for the aesthetic revolution taking over social media. For the first time since taking office, Matteo Rinaldi felt the ground shift beneath his feet. Seated in his office, lined with dark wood, surrounded by trophies and photographs of iconic campaigns, he read a freshly published article from Europe's most influential fashion portal. The new era of Ferrara, irreverence, innovation, and the feminine touch Matteo Rinaldi didn't see coming. The headline hit him like a pin to the ego. The article not only praised the cultural impact of the new collection, but also revealed something Matteo didn't yet know. Leah had signed an official contract with Sophie Dalmar. And more, as co-author of the aesthetic revolution, her name was now in headlines across the globe. The phone rang. A board member. Did you know about this? Matteo hung up without answering. Hours later, he walked into the design studio like a silent storm. Leah stood in front of a fabric panel, headphones on. She removed them slowly when she saw him. You went behind my back, he said, his tone more wounded than angry. No, Leah replied, steady. I moved ahead of a delay that had lasted for years. The silence that followed was heavy, thick as velvet. For Matteo, it wasn't just about a contract. It was about pride, control, reputation, and maybe something more. Because he trusted her. And now that trust felt wounded, displaced. But Leah was wounded too. Because Matteo's refusal to see the value in her vision felt like a personal denial. Meanwhile, the press fueled the tension with headlines like Ferrara's Rebel Muse versus the Guardian of Legacy. Social media took sides. Younger audiences idolized Leah. Conservative executives clung to the stability Matteo represented. The brand stood at the eye of a storm, and they were at the center of the brand. On a solitary night, Matteo stepped into the dark studio and turned on the projector to watch the new campaign videos. He wanted to understand what was so magnetic about that collection. And then he saw it. Models dancing in abandoned factories. Looks that screamed freedom. Bold colors on real, not perfect, bodies. A soundtrack that didn't sell luxury, but courage. And at the end, the final image. A model, her back turned, hair in a classic bun. and a subtle glance over her shoulder, as if saying, "Are you coming or are you staying behind?" Matteo froze. There was something in that gaze, something familiar. It was Leah's gaze. And for the first time he saw, it wasn't rebellion. It was vision. It was soul. It was everything he'd tried to contain, and now it disarmed him completely. But admiration, when born from conflict, is dangerous, because it leaves no room for escape. And Matteo knew. He was beginning to admire her, much more than he should. The Maison Ferrara boardroom had always been ruled by polished silences and cold, calculated strategies. But that morning, the air felt electric. Investors from the board, some from London, others from New York, sat at the table, their eyes fixed on the statistics from the new collection. The rise in social media metrics, the engagement among younger audiences, the early sales, the numbers were undeniable. That's when Matteo Rinaldi did the unthinkable. Leah Ferrara should lead the next collection, he said, his gaze steady on the stunned faces around him. Not even Leah, seated beside him, saw it coming. Her breath caught for a moment. She looked at him, searching for irony in his voice. But there was none. What she found instead was harder to name: challenge, acceptance, maybe surrender. But it wasn't an act of kindness. It was a chess move. Matteo wanted to put her to the test, to let her lead under the spotlight with all the pressure and risk that came with it. If she failed, the weight would be hers to bear. But if she succeeded, then he'd have to admit she wasn't just a brilliant creative director. She was the new face of the Maison. And maybe his heart already knew that. Leah accepted the challenge. Her chin held high, though her stomach churned. What looked like victory came laced with isolation. With Matteo stepping away from the creative process, the team split. Some backed her. Others quietly sabotaged her, delaying deliverables, questioning choices, withholding support. And Matteo, even at a distance, was always watching. He appeared when she least expected it, backstage at photo shoots, seated silently during internal presentations, in the back of the room during brainstorming sessions. He was present, but not to rescue her, to observe, to test how far she would go. But one night, something shifted. It was raining. Milan shimmered in yellow reflections across the wet streets. Leah was alone in the atelier, hand-stitching the hem of the gown that would be the centerpiece of the new campaign. She was exhausted, her eyes tired, her hands trembling, but her fingers burned with focus, with truth. That's when Matteo walked in. He said nothing, just approached her, quietly, as if not to break the moment. He picked up the zipper she couldn't fasten, and with a single, careful motion, clicked it into place. "I've never seen you like this before," he said softly. Leah looked up. "That's because you never wanted to look." The sentence lingered in the air like perfume. Matteo didn't respond. He simply stood there, beside her, for a while longer, watching, breathing in sync. And in that silence, something changed. Conflict turned into choreography. Tension became longing. They didn't touch. Not yet. But in that moment, both knew. Their next move wouldn't be professional. It would be personal. The collection led by Leah Ferrara was launched under a champagne-colored sky, with the entire city of Milan watching. The fashion press gave it a standing ovation. Sales broke records. Vogue Italia and Elle called it the aesthetic rebirth of tradition. Maison Ferrara was finally reconnected with the present. But with success came the turning tide. Investors, dazzled by her boldness, now saw Leah as the true mind behind the Maison. Interview requests, lectures, partnership offers. Every door opened in her name. Matteo watched from a distance, and it consumed him. Not jealousy, something deeper, something unfamiliar, because she hadn't just won. She had won without him. Then came the rupture. During a meeting, Matteo discovered, through the press, that Leah had closed a global deal with fashion activist Zia Lane. The headline read, Leah Ferrara takes Maison Ferrara global. Partnership with Zia Lane unites fashion and purpose. Matteo entered her office. No knock. You crossed the line, he said. Leah looked up, calm, but unshaken. I crossed your line. Mine? I redefine it every day. The silence between them exploded. I trusted you, Matteo whispered. Trust isn't control, Leah replied. I did what was right for the brand. And deep down, you know that. He hesitated. Because she was right. But what hurt wasn't her decision. It was that she didn't need him. She didn't include him. And that mattered. Not as a CEO. As a man. Days passed, and the distance between them became cruel. Leah avoided him. Matteo appeared only when he had to. Their glances, once filled with unspoken words, vanished. They pretended not to feel, pretended not to miss. But at night, when the atelier emptied and Milan went quiet, they both remained, separated by floors, by pride, by everything they never dared to say. Then came the final blow. At a board dinner, one executive said what no one else dared. Maybe it's time for Matteo Rinaldi to step down from creative direction. The words were gentle, but they hit like an earthquake. Matteo swallowed hard. He knew this wasn't just professional. It was the sign he was losing space. Worse, he was losing her. Leah said nothing, but her eyes, for the first time in a long time, looked sad, because what was at stake wasn't just a leadership seat. It was everything they still hadn't built together.
If you've made it this far, I want to know your opinion. Did Leah make the right decision? Or was she unfair to Matteo? Whose side are you on? Tell us in the comments. Are you hashtag Team Leah or hashtag Team Matteo?
Meanwhile, Matteo had vanished from Milan. He retreated to a family home in the Tuscan countryside, a place where his grandmother, a legendary seamstress, once lived. The house was simple, with peeling walls, the scent of dried lavender, and an old sewing machine hidden beneath a white sheet. But what surprised him as soon as he arrived was Lizzie, the old neighbor. An unresolved love, suspended in time. Lizzie had returned to Tuscany to care for her ailing mother. She was quieter, more fragile. So was he. That afternoon, they walked through golden fields, past cypress trees, and the scent of damp earth. They talked, laughed at old memories. Lizzie saw a possibility there. She felt that Matteo's return couldn't be just coincidence. It had to be fate. The next morning, she knocked on his door. She brought fresh bread, still warm from the stone oven. The smell of rosemary filled the kitchen. Matteo invited her in for coffee, and for a moment he felt comfortable. There was something sweet in her presence, familiar, but also lukewarm, as if the flame was there just to warm, not to ignite. Lizzie spoke of the past, of the life they might have had. But Matteo was no longer looking at her. He was looking inward. When Lizzie left, he remained in silence. And then the memories began to return. He remembered his grandmother beside him, sketching with charcoal on coffee-stained scraps of paper. He remembered sewing his first button. He remembered the emotion of seeing a dress complete, not for the prestige, but for the feeling. And he remembered Leah's gaze weeks before when she said, "Fashion is more than profit. It's soul." He realized he had lost himself trying too hard to protect things. The name, the structure, the legacy. But in doing so, he had suffocated everything that made fashion feel alive. Meanwhile, in Milan, Leah carried the creative responsibilities with grace and determination. The new collection with Zia Lane was taking shape, blending sustainability, technology, and emotional storytelling. The team felt inspired, but something was missing. She missed Matteo. Not the controlling Matteo, not the flawless CEO, but the man who listened without filters when no one else understood her. The man who, for one brief moment, zipped up a dress with a tenderness that spoke louder than 1,000 words. In the hills of Tuscany, Matteo began sketching again. By hand. No tablets. No goals. With every pencil stroke, a little pride fell away. He experimented with natural fabrics. Sewed by hand. Created pieces no one had asked for, just to remember who he was before the numbers. And in every sketch, the face that appeared without warning was hers. Leah. Days passed, and Matteo understood, with painful clarity, the calm of Tuscany, the silence of the hills, the gentle care of Lizzie, were not what stirred his soul. It was beautiful. It was safe. But it wasn't passion. It wasn't purpose. It was time to return, not to reclaim power, but to recover the truth. It was late at night at Maison Ferrara. The building, which during the day buzzed with tailors, models, and rushed voices, now slept in silence, lit only by the warm glow of desk lamps in the atelier. Leah was alone, her tired eyes fixed on the sketch before her, drawing lines that no longer seemed to obey her intuition. Even with the collection complete, something in her chest still felt restless, as if the work wasn't truly finished. That's when she heard footsteps in the hallway. Soft. Familiar. She slowly lifted her gaze. And there he was, Matteo Rinaldi, standing at the door, in a dark coat, unshaven, with an expression she had never seen on him before. Vulnerability. No words. No apologies. Just a look. He walked in silently, pulled a roll of raw fabric from his bag, and unrolled it across the table. Hand-drawn sketches, imperfect and intense. Dresses with bold lines, reclaimed fabrics, volumes inspired by the forms of nature. They weren't polished. They were alive. "They're not meant to please critics," Matteo said, his voice low. "Just meant to reach people." Leah didn't respond immediately. She studied every sketch, every fold. Then she studied him. The transformation wasn't just visual, it was personal. "You came back," she said. "I never really wanted to leave," he admitted. "But I had to get lost to finally see what you've always seen." Silence. He took a step closer. "If you still want to, I'd like to build this collection with you. Not as CEO. Not as a boss. As a partner." Leah closed her eyes for a second, took a deep breath. Her heart beat like it did on the night of a show's premiere. "You know what you're asking me, don't you?" "I do." She ran her fingers over one of the sketches. There was poetry there. There was regret. But above all, there was love. "Then let's do it right." Months later, the collection was released. Minimalist. Intense. Authentic. A union of Leah's sensitivity and Matteo's structure. Pieces that spoke of reinvention, of imperfection, of courage. The critics surrendered. The audience stood in ovation. And for the first time, Maison Ferrara was celebrated not for its tradition, but for its soul. Backstage, Matteo held Leah's hand. She was radiant, her face glowing under the stage lights that had just gone out. "You saved the brand, Leah." She looked into his eyes. "And you saved the part of me I almost gave up protecting." They stared at each other in silence, as if understanding something that never needed to be said out loud. And then, like two designers standing before a new creation, they took the first step to begin again, together. The show was over. The hall of Maison Ferrara was almost empty now, but it still pulsed with the memory of the applause. The runway, bathed in soft lights, looked like a golden river, carrying away what had been and announcing what was to come. It was the end of a collection, and the beginning of something much greater. Leah was still there, front row, dressed in black, but with her eyes full of light. She stared at the silent stage as if trying to capture the last breath of a dream before it faded. She had won. The critics had surrendered. The audience had been moved. But deep down, it wasn't about fashion. It was about her. And about him. That's when Matteo appeared at the top of the staircase. His tie loosened, beard unshaven, eyes tired but alive. And in his hands a bouquet of white flowers, tied with a scrap of the fabric they had once chosen together. He walked down slowly, unhurried, like someone returning not to a place but to a person. "You changed everything," he said, his voice trembling. "The Maison, the collection, and me." Leah rose, gently. Her eyes met his and searched for nothing. She already had every answer there. "I just followed what I felt," she said, "even if it meant losing you along the way." Matteo stepped closer. He offered the flowers. "You never lost me. I just needed silence to understand that without you, success has no sound." She took the bouquet carefully, as if accepting a second chance. And now, it was only a whisper, but it said everything. He looked at her with the calm of someone who had stopped running. "Now, I just want to be part of your next creation. On the runway, in the studio, or wherever you are." They didn't rush, but something in both of them knew this was the moment. Matteo leaned in, and then he kissed her. It wasn't a kiss for the press, not for the audience. It was a kiss for the backstage. For everything they had stitched in silence. For every seam they had broken and rebuilt together. When they pulled away, Leah's eyes were filled with tears. But it wasn't pain. It was peace. "Shall we go home?" he asked, fingers intertwining with hers. She smiled, with the lightness of someone who's starting over. "Only if it's to rebuild. Our way." And so they walked together among the empty chairs. Side by side, like two authors closing a chapter. Outside, Milan bloomed in spring. But inside, what was finally blooming was an entire story. After everything, once the flashes faded and the rush of the collection dissolved into stillness, Matteo and Leah left Milan behind. They went to his family's old stone house in the hills of Tuscany. A quiet place, far from the noise, where time moved differently. There alone together, they lived slow days. No meetings, no sketches, no pressure. Just the two of them, rediscovering the other side of their routine. They laughed, slept in, drank coffee, without checking the time, swam in the small terrace pool, walked through the vineyards at sunset. They talked about everything, and sometimes about nothing at all. They didn't have to create for the world. They simply created space for each other. And before returning to Milan, to fabrics, fittings, and the next collection, they carried back something that doesn't go on a runway. A love made slow, and stitched in stillness.
If you made it this far, you're already part of this story with us. What score does it deserve from 0 to 10? Leave in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next story. Thanks for being here.